You know, we hear the gospel and we hear how Jesus rose from the dead, but none of the gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, really explain to us what the resurrection is. It really doesn't make that clear. I mean, yes, they walked in and they saw the cloth there and the part that had covered his face, that cloth separate from there, folded, but it doesn't explain to us about the resurrection. It doesn't make that very clear at all. And we know that when they finally see Jesus, he's able to be touched. He's real. They can put his finger in the holes and their hand in his side, and then he disappears. What is the resurrection like? I don't know. People will say, well, what will we be like when we rise from the dead? And I'll tell them, I have no clue. I have no clue. Somebody just the other day asked me, will I have my 28-year-old body again? Or will it be this, late model? I don't know. The Gospels never explain that. But then the Gospels don't attempt to explain resurrection to us. What resurrection does is it explains the gospel. Because it is the power of resurrection at work in Jesus that's there not just at the very end of his life, but all through his life. That's the great wonder of the gospel. When Jesus goes to the wedding feast at Cana, and the young couple runs out of wine, Jesus orders 6 large jars to be filled with water, and the power of resurrection is at work when that water is turned into wine, the wine of gladness and joy. That's why John doesn't call it a miracle. He calls it a sign. When Jesus cleanses the leper, when Jesus opens the eyes of the blind, when Jesus cures the woman with hemorrhages, the power of resurrection is at work, raising her up, transforming her, transforming them. No, it is not a miracle. As John makes it very clear, it's a sign. Again and again throughout the gospel, we see those signs when Jesus is called to the house of Jairus because Jairus' daughter has died. Jesus walks in and takes her by the hand and says, "Little girl, get up." And the power of resurrection is at work in her. When Jesus stands at the tomb of Lazarus, his last sign, John tells us, he calls him out. He calls him out from death. This one who has been dead for 4 days now comes out into the light of day, and the power of resurrection is at work. The reality is that the end of Jesus' life tells what was going on all through his life. For it was the power of resurrection at work. And it's a sign. Not a miracle, but a sign of something greater. You and I gather here to celebrate Easter, and for a lot of people, we think of it, well, it kind of explains what happens when we die. We rise with the Lord. I'm going to say, you missed the whole point. Go back again, start over. You missed the point. It's not about dying and rising at the end. It's about rising all along. The power of resurrection is at work in our lives, not just at the end, but it's meant to be at work all through our lives if we will allow that power, if we'll open our minds and our hearts to that power, if we open our lives to what the Lord offers to us. The power of resurrection can be at work within us and transform us, and to make our lives so much better, to make us so much better, to make our world so much better, only if we allow the power of resurrection to be at work within us. We celebrate today that power of resurrection. because it is crucial, my sisters and brothers, to the whole work of Christ. It's not about the end. You know, one of my favorite lines from Emily Dickinson, she wrote, "I'm not going to heaven when I die. I'm going there all along." And even though she was not the greatest of believers, she had a profound understanding of the message of the gospel. That Jesus, who has called us to be his followers, invites us to go to heaven with him all along, to live resurrection, to find its power in our life again and again. You know, I look back in my life and I think of how many times the power of resurrection has been at work. It's not just something I believe, but it's something that I've come to know in my life. You know, it happened many times. Back in '74, when I crawled out from under a truck and stood up and thanked the people who stopped to help me when my Pinto collided with the semi on the New York State Thruway, the power of resurrection was at work. When I found it in my heart, the ability to forgive the one who had abused me as a child, not just once, but many times. When I found the power to forgive and to let that go, the power of resurrection was at work in my life. When I've grown through difficult times, when life seemed rather bleak and dark, and I've just been overwhelmed with depression and sadness and despair that maybe, everything I've tried to do was worthless. The power of resurrection has been at work in my life. This last year, as I went through cancer, somehow, despite all of those things that seemed to rob me of life, somehow the power of resurrection was always at work, raising me up and giving me hope. Sisters and brothers, the power of resurrection is not about at the end. It's about something that we are meant to experience all through our life. That whenever we have loved, only to have that love rejected by another, when we're dumped, when that love is taken away, or that love even turns to hatred, learning to love again can be so very, very difficult. And yet, when we do, the power of resurrection is at work. When someone we care for has betrayed our trust, that has been broken, that somehow we have this great despair that we will never be able to trust again, and yet somehow in our lives we find that ability to trust once more. The power of resurrection is at work in us. Whenever we are able to overcome those things that bring death to us, our sin, our suffering, whatever it may be, whenever we find the power to rise above that, the power of resurrection is at work within us. I've said it before, and it's really become my motto, that there is never a cross without a resurrection. We celebrate that profound truth today, that no matter what it is that darkens our life, whatever it is that causes us despair, no matter what it is that causes us pain or sorrow, no matter what loss we've experienced, the power of resurrection can raise us up. Jesus showed us through his signs all through his life, the greatest of which was at the end. My sisters and brothers, we are not meant to go to heaven when we die, but rather to go there all along, to be raised up again and again and again in the power of resurrection, to know the power of that in our lives, not just at the end, but all through our life. And those who have come to know it are transformed. They become more. They become more and more in the very image of Christ himself. they come to the fullness of life for which God intended them. My sisters and brothers, please, today is not about how things end. It's really about how we are meant to live every day to make that end truly great and glorious. In the end, we are called to rise with him again and again and again. And those who do that know the power of resurrection in their life.